Hello! If you are listening to me here, then you have a time machine in your hands and you are aiming to travel to medieval Europe. An interesting choice, indeed. I want to tell you something right away. This journey is going to be very different. Before you go, I will talk to you about some important topics. But know this guide cannot explain everything in a comprehensive way. That is why, if there are things on your mind, you should research them yourself. Now, you should carefully research the place you are going to visit. Of course, you should see this guide as a starting point. Before starting this trip, let's clarify some important points. The Middle Ages is quite a long and comprehensive period. It also occupies a very large place in Europe. I will be telling you about the period between the 1100s and the 1300s. The period I will describe is called the Central Middle Ages. In addition, I will talk about core regions such as England, France, Germany, and northern Italy, places that people who speak the common language, English, refer to as medieval Europe. From a different perspective, I assume that you will be able to visit a specific medieval city. I strongly recommend that you go to a rural village because it seems that observing what happens there will be much more difficult. If you do not know anyone, or if you are simply observing people wandering around, the situation may feel quite strange. Do not misunderstand me. People will most likely welcome you very warmly. They will even take very good care of you and be curious about you and what you tell them. However, there are many places to see and explore in villages. That is why I assume all of you will end up visiting a town. However, visiting a castle is not a very reasonable idea. A castle is not a place where a random person can simply enter and wander around. In fact, castles are considered private property. They are also like part-time military facilities. That is why they are not very suitable places for tourists. However, if you want to do castle tourism and see them, now is the right time. Or choose a period when castles are no longer very important, not the Middle Ages. If you are ready, we are entering the topic. Lean back and let's travel together. I will explain, you will experience it. Chapter 2. Health and Survival. We begin with the highest priority and biggest topic, health. Health will be the most important issue for all of us, and the one we think about the most. Whatever diseases there are on the market that you can be vaccinated against, please make sure you get those vaccines. However, I must tell you this. Even those vaccines you receive will definitely not be enough. If you arrive there, you will most certainly get sick. First of all, you need to be much more careful about stomach and intestinal infections. Like all of you, the immune system of someone unfamiliar with the microbial environment of that era will react when it encounters the food and water there. Your body's metabolism will go through a sudden shock. And most importantly, malaria was very common in medieval Europe. That is exactly why you should definitely carry malaria medication with you, especially if you are traveling south. One thing I am not certain about is whether malaria existed in medieval England. Based on this information, I recommend that you carefully research the places you plan to visit. Friends, do not forget that I am not an expert doctor. What you need to do in this matter is consult a healthcare professional. Now we come to another crucial point, personal safety. This is truly a very big issue and something you need to think about very carefully. Absolutely travel in groups. Never, ever go alone. The reason I emphasize this so strongly is that there are many people in that environment with bad intentions. Of course, we cannot think the same way about everyone. Most people are actually quite decent individuals. They will not harm you. However, there will still be many people there who may wish to do you harm. Crime rates are quite high, especially petty crimes. Theft and robbery are very common, and their main targets are travelers, tourists. The reason is that tourists are far from their safe zones and are easy targets. This is exactly where we see a major difference between modern society and medieval society.
In the Middle Ages, your safety depended on being part of a social network. If you belonged to a certain group, having connections with people would protect and watch over you. This can be described as a kind of peer network. For example, if you were a tradesperson selling meat or other goods, you would have interactions with other tradespeople. That was your place of support. A strong family was also an extremely important support network. Your cousins, siblings, nephews, there was a solid family structure where people supported one another. This was people's greatest protection against violent crime. If someone wanted to intentionally harm you, they knew they would face retaliation. They knew your mother and father would respond and seek revenge. Because of this, systems of support existed in many different forms. There were friends, acquaintances, familiar tradespeople, people of the same age. And there were also those who came from the hierarchical order formed within a framework of respect, such as our households. If you belonged to a noble household, anyone who happened to get involved with you knew they were dealing with the entire household. When you started working for someone, you were considered to be under that person's protection. In a rural area, a peasant was under the protection of the lord they served. All relationships in medieval Europe functioned in this way. People were deeply intertwined when it came to social life. No one acted alone. Everyone was part of a group. As I mentioned earlier, people belonged to many groups in different ways: family, work, and social circles. This was the most important thing that held society together, the interwoven existence of these social networks. From this, many practices and situations emerged. I will talk about many of them later in the video. Now, know this well. People living in the Middle Ages did have a deterrent against crime, at least against violent crimes. It may not have been a perfect deterrent, but it did exist. People who committed minor crimes would try to beat you and steal your belongings only when they thought there would be no retaliation. If you had no one behind you, or if you were weak, they would do it. As I said at the beginning, traveling alone was generally not a very good idea, unfortunately. Of course, this also varied depending on place and time. There were famines in the Middle Ages. Consecutive years of poor harvests affected people deeply. Migration from rural areas to cities increased in search of a better life. However, they could not find work in the cities either, and they encouraged one another to commit crimes. So in certain periods, crime rates and the threat of violent crime were even higher. In any case, always be prepared for everything. Make sure you travel in groups. Do not go alone, because if you are alone, you become a target. In the Middle Ages, people carried their own weapons and used them when necessary. You should definitely carry a weapon with you as well. Small or large, it doesn't matter. Carry a knife and learn how to use it well enough to defend yourself. If you don't know how to use a sword, don't bring one, because you won't know what you're doing. But a dagger or a knife will be more than sufficient to protect you from physical attacks. There's another point related to security. Even if you are not personally attacked, your belongings will most likely be stolen. Always keep your valuables on you and have a special pouch or similar made to protect them. Never leave them unattended. If you do, they will definitely be stolen, and then you can sing the "Oh no, poor me" song. Once something is stolen, you have absolutely no chance of getting it back. If your neighbor stole it and you know this, you can take them to court. But if you are wandering around and don't know anyone, once you are pickpocketed, there is nothing you can do. In the Middle Ages, many crimes went unpunished. For this very reason, when a criminal was caught, they were given extremely harsh punishments. This is one of the famous characteristics of the Middle Ages. Even crimes that we would consider relatively minor and insignificant today were punished with very severe physical punishments. We can give examples such as mutilation, cutting off hands or feet. The reason these punishments were so harsh was that catching criminals was an extremely difficult challenge. The only way to reduce crime was to make people believe that if they were caught, they would truly regret it. In other words, because most criminals were not caught, the severity of punishments compensated for this lack. In developed societies, the rate at which criminals are caught is much higher compared to those times. In addition, modern society has a prison system. It is also very clear that there is a police system that can enforce laws much more effectively. There is no longer a need for punishments of that severity. Or perhaps the phrase, no longer a need, carries a value judgment. Let's move on and talk a bit about the prison system. Especially in the United States, but not only there, we have a very developed prison system. In medieval Europe, however, because punishments were so harsh, there was no real need for such a system. You might be imprisoned temporarily while waiting trial or execution, but the main purpose was very different. Let's say you committed a crime, went to court, and a verdict was given. The punishment was usually carried out immediately, often on the same day. The only situation in which people were imprisoned for long periods in the Middle Ages was if they were wealthy nobles. If you were one of the nobility and were captured in war, you would be imprisoned to extract money. You would be kept in prison until your family paid a large sum. In other words, keeping them imprisoned meant seeing them as a money tree. Once you caught such a captive, you would rub your hands in delight. But imprisoning the general population, ordinary criminals, was not financially sensible. Never forget this. Medieval societies were incredibly poor by modern standards. Dirt poor, in fact. There were only a handful of people with money in the economy. Governments were also far less wealthy compared to modern governments. This was not only true for medieval Europe. The larger and more powerful empires in Asia were the same in this respect. Places like China were richer and more powerful than European states at the time, but even they were very poor by modern standards. That is why it was not feasible for a medieval culture to have a prison system and to keep people in this way.
Chapter 3: Money and the Economy. Now we will talk about money. You must have money with you. You have to bring money with you. In the past, people used silver coins to buy everything. So you should also bring silver with you. You can trade using silver. In the Middle Ages, money was very important. Silver was needed for everything. You should not go without money. Different coins contained different amounts of silver. Different mints added more or less purity to the silver. In other words, they changed the purity of the silver, and this affected the value of the coin. Throughout Europe, the same denomination names were used. There were pennies, shillings, and pounds. 12 pennies made 1 shilling, and 20 shillings were worth 1 pound. This will sound familiar to English speakers listening. If you are coming here from England and are old enough, you may remember the British currency before the switch to the decimal system. This system was not only used in England, it was also the same in France, Germany, and Italy. They had the same denominations with the same amounts. As everywhere, they had different names. In regions where Romance languages were spoken, pennies were given names derived from the Latin word denarius. In French, denier. In Italian, denaro. In Germanic languages, they used a variation of the word penny. In modern High German, Pfennig, though they would say something like Pfennig. This was the basic unit. The penny was also the variable unit. It was what people used in their everyday lives. Shillings and pounds were rarely minted. Saying never would be incorrect, but it was very rare. There were shilling coins in Milan, but pound coins were never minted. You would not find them. They were only used for accounting. So even though accountants would record amount as pounds, shillings, and pennies in their ledgers, in daily life you would only trade using penny coins. Silver pennies, half pennies, and quarter pennies can be given as examples. These were normal everyday transaction coins. However, because the silver content varied from place to place, pennies from different regions had different values relative to one another. Different exchange rates were set, and the exchange rate was determined by the amount of silver contained in the penny. If you went to one region and then moved on to another town, you would need to exchange your money into the local currency. You would go to a money changer and convert your coins into ones recognized by local merchants. That way, they could easily know their value. Every town had money changers. This was a standard institution. You would not find this in a rural village, but in towns, they definitely existed. In this way, you could handle your transactions with ease. Chapter 4: Accommodation and Food. Now let's come to where you will sleep. You have a few different options for this. If you are in a rural area, your options are unfortunately very limited. In rural regions, there are two options that come to mind for now. Either you stay in a private home with someone, this is the most common and preferred option. If you are passing through places as a strange traveler, I should talk a bit about villages. I said I would talk about towns, but this is also important. If your path takes you through a small farming village and you are just passing by, everyone will notice you. Oh, a foreigner. If it is a village on a main road where people pass through frequently, this may not attract much attention. The more remote the village you pass through, the more noticeable the situation becomes. If you stop and look around, observing your surroundings, people will want to chat with you. They will be curious about who you are and where you're going. Exactly for this reason, you will need a background story, which I will explain later. These people will treat you kindly because people like to talk and are also a bit curious. Talking to someone they have never spoken to before would be very appealing to them, and they would be happy to gain new information. Never forget this. In the Middle Ages, people did not have television, cinema, or the internet. People depended on other people. They had to create their own entertainment by talking to one another, and that is generally what they did. They usually did not interfere with anyone else's business. Chatting with a new person, meeting them, listening to news from them was very attractive and entertaining. They also did not have newspapers to get news from. You got information by talking to people, by chatting with travelers they saw on the road, or perhaps by listening to a neighbor who had returned from a pilgrimage and hearing about the places they had visited. This is how news spread in Europe, not only there, but everywhere in the world. Unfortunately, there were no newspapers. There was a system of communication and news sharing through conversation. So people would invite you into their homes. They would take care of you and be very friendly. Inviting you into their homes was a completely normal thing. In rural areas, another option was monasteries. Monasteries and monks were obliged to accept travelers. In cities, you have another option. Cities also had monasteries and houses for monks, and you could stay there. In addition, someone might invite you into their home and let you stay. This was also completely normal. But a third option were inns, facilities designed specifically for overnight stays. Now let's come to where you will eat. Here too, we have several options. If you are staying at an inn, there are usually meals you can buy there. Again, if you are staying in a private home, the host will provide you with food. Another option was what we would call restaurants in modern terms, food houses, which were basically takeaway places. They had a counter opening to the street. You would approach the counter and order your food. They would either prepare it to order or sell you ready-made food. You could find various kinds of food this way, especially foods that could be packaged well and carried easily, things like pastries and pies. Another option were the weekly markets. Only once a week, farmers or vendors would come and you could buy vegetables and fruits that were in season. In the Middle Ages, everything was seasonal and very fresh. You could not buy anything out of season. But whatever season you were there in, this was another option for you. Chapter 5. Language Barriers and Communication. Now let's come to the language barrier. Unfortunately, this topic is a bit complicated because every small region has its own language, or perhaps we should say dialect, however you prefer to call it. Which language you should learn depends on where you are going. However, unfortunately, we do not have good learning materials for every language and dialect spoken in medieval Europe. Most language materials exist for languages in which many literary works were written. Let's take French as an example. There were many different dialects throughout France. In fact, every region, every province had its own language. They were not fully mutually intelligible with neighboring regions. For example, if you were from Champagne, you might not fully understand someone from Picardy or Normandy. All of them had their own Old French variations. But the Old French taught in textbooks is Parisian French, because when literary works were written in the vernacular, that was the dialect that was used. The same situation applies to Old High German. The Old High German you learned from textbooks was not spoken the same way everywhere in southern Germany. So even if you learn a vernacular language, know that you may still have difficulty communicating with people, depending on which region you travel to. If you learned Old French and go to Paris, you will not have much trouble there. But if you learn Old French and go somewhere else, like Dijon, you may have difficulty understanding people, even if you try to learn the local language spoken there. The good thing is that the local language or dialect is not your only option. because Europe was a kind of multicultural, multilingual place. People moved from one place to another. They were networks that spanned geographical areas. For this reason, international languages were used for contact between different cultures. The two most common contexts were places of worship and, of course, trade. The church was an international organization, so it used an international language for internal communication, Latin. Merchants also had long-distance connections. They had partners and people they worked with in different parts of Europe and the Mediterranean. They needed to communicate with one another. For this reason, there was a trade language called lingua franca. This was a simplified Romance language, something like an intermediary language. It was like an average of different dialects from Italy, France, and Catalonia. Because of this, merchants from various parts of the Mediterranean could communicate with each other. One interesting aspect of lingua franca is that it left traces in modern languages. If you look at modern Greek, modern Egyptian Arabic, and probably Turkish as well, you will find words in these languages that come from the lingua franca of late medieval and early modern Mediterranean merchants. Anyway, if you are going to present yourself as a merchant, knowing lingua franca will be useful and will make things much easier, just so you know. It will be possible for you to communicate with people in different cities. Which language you learn and which language you use is closely related to your background story. Let's say you are going to learn Old French. Let me think for a moment. Hopefully you do not mind. Let's say you learn Old French and plan to go to Paris. That makes sense, right? That is, Old French taught in textbooks. However, you are not from Paris or the Ile-de-France region. You are not from that area, right? You cannot and should not tell people, "Oh yes, I'm from here, from a village 10 miles outside the city," because you might run into someone from that village and they will not know you. Your background story should be that you come from far away. Now, let me talk a bit about background stories, and then I will return to the language issue. You absolutely must have a background story. You must definitely have an explanation for who you are and why you are there, because people will be very curious and they will ask you. But let me explain. This is not just curiosity. It is curiosity, yes, but not only curiosity. They need to know who you are in order to know how to treat you and how to communicate with you. For modern audiences, this will of course sound a bit unfamiliar, especially if you come from very egalitarian cultures, like North America, Europe, or Australia. This will feel a bit strange. Of course, in our cultures, there is also the idea that everyone is equal. No one is better or worse than anyone else. Everyone is equal. No one receives special treatment. This idea surrounds us so much, and we have internalized it culturally so much that going to medieval Europe will feel truly strange. But when you go to medieval Europe, people do not think this way at all. The idea that people exist on different social levels is very widespread. People are on different rungs of a ladder. Even ladder isn't really a good metaphor, because it's not something you can usually climb. Instead, think of it as layers, like a cake. When you speak to someone, one thing you must know is this: is the person you are talking to socially above you or below you? There are many social rules tied to this distinction. If you encounter someone who is socially above you, be careful. Please behave very respectfully toward them. It may be necessary to bow and greet them. You must use extremely polite and respectful language, you must not turn your back on them, and you must absolutely not show disrespect. There are all these rules you must follow when dealing with someone socially above you. There are also different expectations about how you should deal with someone who is socially below you. Because of these rules, when people meet you, they need to know how to deal with you. They need to know if you are socially above or below them. Alright, then you need a background story that places you into a specific class or rank. This will determine your social world. First, we need to find something reasonable to define who you are. You must come from far away. You cannot be local. You have two options. Either you are a merchant or you are a pilgrim. You could also say, "I migrated from another country," but that is not a good idea. People will try to take advantage of you. So that is why you should be a pilgrim or a merchant. Much more effective. I suppose you could also say, "I'm a man of the church," which could be interesting as well. If you know Latin and know a lot about the medieval church, you could try being a priest. But pilgrims could be anyone. Pilgrimage is traveling to visit a shrine. This was one of the most common forms of tourism in the Middle Ages. There were many shrines in many parts of Europe. However, only a small number attracted pilgrims from very long distances. Santiago de Compostela is very famous. Rome is another. Paris is a good place for attracting pilgrims, and Canterbury is of course a famous example from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. In Germany, Cologne, perhaps Versailles as well, there were many other places too. If you are visiting a town that is a major pilgrimage site, that can be your story. Or the town may simply be on the pilgrimage route and you are stopping for a few days. That becomes your plan B. You might not even be visiting the shrine at all. You could visit Paris and tell everyone you are going to Santiago, saying you are just passing through. This is a completely legitimate background story, and people will accept it. Being a merchant is very effective in this context. But if you are a merchant, you also need a background story about what you trade in, where your family is, and who your connections are in the region. This can be a bit more complicated. Personally, I would choose to be a pilgrim. I think it's the easiest option. But then you have to decide something else. You are not alone, you are traveling in a group, but you still need to decide what your role is in the town you arrive in. Do you live in a village? Do you do manual labor? Are you a tradesperson? Do you have a job or do you practice a craft? Whatever it is, research the appropriate clothing for that person and wear it. Who are you dealing with where you are staying? Who are you spending time with? Are there people you sit with and talk to at length? Those are the people who will invite you into their homes and want to befriend you and want to talk with you. Taking all this into account, decide who you will associate with in the place you are visiting. If you enter a city disguised as a very wealthy merchant, you will not interact much with servants, laborers, or craftsmen. You will not interact much with nobles either. You will mostly talk to other merchants, especially merchants of your own class, and especially those dealing in the same goods as you. This is another argument against being a merchant, because you really need to know what you are talking about. Yeah, I deal in silver. Oh really? Me too. Great, let's have a 20-minute conversation about silver trade in the Baltic Sea. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not ready for that. So what you really need to think about in this context is your background story. And coming back to language, this is where how you prepare your language skills comes in. If your background story is that you are a man of the church, you need to know some Latin. Not necessarily fluently, not all clergy were fluent in Latin, but they would at least know enough to understand it. But if you are telling everyone, I am a tenor from a city 2,000 miles away and I'm on pilgrimage, do you know what a tenor is? Someone who works with leather. If you tell everyone you meet I'm a tenor from a city 2,000 miles away and I'm on pilgrimage, but you also know a lot of Latin, that becomes strange. To put it another way, if you show strong Latin skills, the people you are talking to will think, why does a tenor know Latin? Be very aware of this. And people were used to meeting people from different places who spoke different dialects, so they were accustomed to dealing with language barriers. Do not let that stop you from talking to people. The people you meet will want to communicate with you. They will want to learn what you do, where you come from, and where you are going. They will want to know not only your social ranking in their eyes, but also who your social network is in the city, who you know in the place you are visiting. They need these things in order to decide how to talk to you and how to interact with you. Let me be very clear. If you do not know what is going on in medieval Europe and they realize this, you are in trouble. They will show you no mercy, they will go straight for your wallet. Let me tell you that. Every shopkeeper will see you as a direct target. Oh, and there's something about shopping that I haven't mentioned before. In medieval Europe, shopping without bargaining doesn't exist. You always bargain. Constantly. Today, in Europe or North America, you walk into a store, the price is the price, there's a tag, and that's it. But in the Middle Ages, it was not like that. Everything was negotiable. And if they realize that you do not know...
Chapter 6. Social Hierarchy and Backstory.
Now, let's dig a bit deeper into that backstory issue I briefly mentioned earlier, because this part is absolutely critical. In the Middle Ages, who you were depended entirely on your relationship to the people around you. Today, we see ourselves as individuals. Our identity comes from our choices, our beliefs, our personality. But in the Middle Ages, it didn't work like that at all. Back then, your identity meant your place within the community. Your family, your profession, the lord or master you were bound to, your religion, your city. All of these defined who you were. So when people met you, they wouldn't ask, "Who are you?" They would ask, "Whose man are you? Who do you work for? Which household are you attached to? Which family do you come from?" Without knowing these things, they wouldn't even know how to talk to you. Let's think about this for a moment. Say you introduce yourself as a craftsman, a shoemaker or weaver, for example. Immediately, you're placed into a social box. You'll naturally start associating with people who do the same kind of work. You'll probably say you belong to a guild. Guilds were associations of people from the same trade. They handled money matters, but they were also deeply social institutions. They set quality standards, fixed prices, trained apprentices. But here's the key point: they protected their members. If you were part of a guild and someone messed with you, they weren't dealing with just you, they were dealing with the entire guild. So a guild wasn't just about economics, it was about security. Now, if you introduce yourself as a pilgrim, everything changes. That creates a completely different atmosphere. Pilgrims were usually temporary visitors. They stayed for a few days and then moved on. So no one expects you to settle in or become part of the neighborhood. Still, they will definitely ask you a few things. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Why are you going? You might say, "I'm going to Santiago to pray for my parents' health." That's perfectly normal. No one would find that strange. But when building your backstory, there's one rule you must follow. It has to be consistent. If you tell one story today and a different one tomorrow, you're done. No one will trust you. Medieval towns were small. Everyone knew everyone. Gossip spread at the speed of light. If your story doesn't add up, everyone will hear about it. There's another very important point. Your story has to match your clothing. Every social class and profession had a recognizable style of dress. Nobles wore expensive fabrics, fur, and colorful clothing. Craftsmen dressed more simply but cleanly and neatly. Peasants and manual laborers wore the cheapest, most basic fabrics. So if you go around saying, "I'm a tanner," while wearing silk, that won't work. People will start asking questions. They'll become suspicious. That's why before you go, you need to research the clothing appropriate to the role you choose. Go to museums, look at history books, study medieval artwork. Then either have those clothes made or find something as close as possible. Do not go in modern clothing. Seriously, it won't work. One more important factor: your age and gender also shape your role. If you're a young man, you're likely an apprentice or a newly trained craftsman. If you're middle-aged, being a master or a merchant makes sense. If you're older, you're a retired master or an experienced elder. For women, things are a bit more complicated. Women generally did not travel alone in the Middle Ages. A woman traveling by herself would be seen as very strange, and honestly, it was dangerous. So if you're a woman, you should always say you're traveling with someone, preferably a husband, a brother, or another male relative. "We're going on pilgrimage together," or "I'm traveling with my brother." That's completely normal. So what roles could a woman have? You could be a merchant's wife, a craftsman's wife, or a widow, which was entirely acceptable. Some women did have professions of their own: midwives, healers, weavers, even women who brewed beer. But these roles weren't the same everywhere. They varied from region to region. So wherever you're planning to go, research that place carefully in advance. And one final topic: children. If you're traveling with children, that actually makes your story more believable. Family pilgrimages were very common at the time. But there's also the practical side of things. You must think seriously about their safety. Keep them close at all times. Never let them out of your sight.
Chapter 7: Racial and Religious Differences.
Now we come to what may be the most sensitive, but also the most important part of the video. So, what if you're not white? What if you're not a Catholic Christian? Because let's be honest, in medieval Western Europe, almost everyone was white and Catholic. Let's start with the issue of not being white. What happens if you don't look European? Honestly, it's not as terrifying as you might think. The kind of racism we know today didn't exist back then. There were prejudices, yes, but not the systematic, deeply ingrained racism of the modern era. For example, today, some white people think black people are less intelligent, morally weak, and so on. Those ideas did not exist in the Middle Ages. In my opinion, and I'm not 100% certain, but still, those ideas come from the era of slavery, the master-slave relationship. Slave owners called their slaves lazy, incompetent, stupid. But of course, they never questioned why they might appear that way. Strange people. There was some slavery in medieval Europe, but it was not race-based. That's the key difference. Seeing a black person did not automatically make people think this person has bad traits. That's an 18th, 19th century development. So if you're black and you go to medieval Europe, you will not be treated the way you would have been in 19th century Europe. People did know that different kinds of people lived in other parts of the world. They knew that people in Africa had dark skin. They thought the reason was the sun. There's a lot of sun in the south, it burns people and darkens their skin, they believed. Similar ideas probably existed among Muslims in the Middle East as well. They divided the world into climate zones, 7 zones to be exact. They believed people's character was shaped by where they lived. Muslim writers would say Europeans were the way they were because they lived in the cold north. Europeans would say Africans were the way they were because it was too hot where they lived. So when you arrive there, you'll most likely encounter curiosity rather than fear. There's a popular idea that medieval people were afraid of everything. I don't really agree with that. They were actually quite curious about meeting people. Of course, not everyone was the same. Some were very kind, some were complete jerks. That's true in every era. For example, there's a Chinese man who leaves China in the Middle Ages, goes to Iraq, and is later sent to Europe as a diplomat. He travels through Italy and France. He's Chinese, so he clearly doesn't look European. Later, he writes his memoirs. He says he had a wonderful time and that everyone was very kind. Of course, he was both a diplomat and a Christian priest. That makes a big difference. Still, it shows this. Looking different did not automatically mean exclusion. Things changed in the modern period. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Europeans developed an obsession with race. Whiteness became the main identity marker. Who was inside and who was outside depended entirely on that. In the Middle Ages, however, the real question was this: are you Christian or not? If you were Christian, you were inside. If you weren't, you were outside. African Christian, Asian Christian, it didn't matter. If you looked and acted Christian, there was no problem. But if you walked around saying, "I'm Muslim," things would change. Because medieval Christians didn't understand Islam at all. To them, Muslims were just another type of pagan. They recognized 3 categories: pagans, Jews, and heretical Christians. They usually put Muslims into the pagan box. So the general advice is, don't say it. Of course, there were exceptions. Spain, Sicily, southern Italy, Mediterranean ports, Muslim merchants existed there. Even Constantinople had a mosque. If you're Jewish, you basically have 2 options. Either you act like a Christian, or you visibly present yourself as Jewish. If it's a short visit, just passing through, acting Christian is easier. But if you're going to a Jewish quarter, entering a synagogue, then you need to dress like a Jew, because Jews were expected to be visibly identifiable. The reason was simple. Everyone wanted to know how they were supposed to interact with you. Who was who needed to be immediately clear. If you look Jewish, you will face prejudice, yes. But if you enter the Jewish community, they had their own internal world. And most of the time, they were forced to live separately anyway. If you're Muslim, most likely don't say it. Act like a Christian instead. If you're Hindu, Buddhist, they probably won't even understand what you are. They'll just call you a pagan. Some Europeans even thought Buddhists were strange Christians. They wear yellow robes, shave their heads. Oh, they must be Christians, they'd say, because Buddhism didn't fit into any category in their minds. But don't forget this. In the Middle Ages, there were significant Christian populations in Asia. Europe was aware of that. So being an Asian Christian would not surprise anyone.
Chapter 8: The Witchcraft Myth and Common Misconceptions.
All right, one more thing. I know I've said one more thing before, but this really is the last one. I see this a lot online. People say things like, "I couldn't go to medieval Europe, they'd hang me as a witch." Or, I have modern clothes, I talk strangely, and they'd burn me. No, 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 no. This is completely wrong. People in the Middle Ages did not fear others just because they were different. They feared people who were different in a way that disrupted social order. They feared chaos, but they wouldn't declare you a witch just because you look weird. Let's go back to the clothing issue. If you walk around in modern clothes, the problem is this. They won't know how to talk to you. Should they be respectful? Should they be rude? How should they address you? Because they have no mental template for modern clothing. That's why you should dress like a local. Not because they'll think you're a witch, but because they won't know where to place you socially. There's also the issue of arrival. If people actually see you appear, then yes, they might say, "What was that just now?" They might think it's magic. So arrive unnoticed. Towns usually had forests nearby. People didn't go into forests much. That's the safest place. Arrive at night. There were no streetlights, no electricity, pitch darkness. If possible, choose a night without a full moon. Arrive when there's no moonlight so no one sees you. But don't enter the town itself at night, because most towns had curfews. If you're caught, they'll lock you up and question you. What you should do is this. Arrive outside the town at night, enter in the morning when everyone else is entering. That's it. So what happens if you show modern technology? Let's say you have something plastic. They'll ask, "What is that?" You say, "I bought it in Aleppo." They'll say, "Oh, okay," because they're used to the idea of exotic goods. They know strange fabrics and items come from Asia. They won't call you a witch, but if you say, "I'm a time traveler," they'll either think you're insane or a liar. Both are bad. No one will talk to you. Don't talk about the future. If you say there will be a great war 700 years from now, they won't understand what you're saying. They'll just think you're crazy. And whatever you do, don't say things like, "The king will die in 3 years." They'll connect that to an assassination plot. You'll be arrested. In short, say nothing about the future. Now, let's clear up this witchcraft issue properly. People think in the Middle Ages, witches were being burned left and right. No. The major witch hunts happened in the 1500s and 1600s. That's not the Middle Ages. We're talking about 1100 to 1300 here. Do you know what witchcraft actually meant? Manipulating invisible forces. Think of a magnet. It affects things without touching them. People believed nature contained invisible forces like this. Witchcraft was the deliberate use of those forces, especially to harm others. If you pull out a phone and show a game, yes, they'll call that magic. But will they burn you? That depends on whether they see you as a threat or just something interesting. I don't recommend it anyway, because you'll attract thieves. You might get beaten. You might get robbed. And if you show technology and then someone important in town dies afterward, they might tie you up. It's not worth it. There's also the germ theory issue. People think that if you explain germs, they'll burn you. No. They'll most likely not care, because there were already multiple medical systems. There were physicians, barber surgeons, folk remedies. For example, they poured wine on wounds. They didn't know why it worked, but they knew that it did. If you say it kills microbes, the response will be, "All right, if you say so." No one throws you into a fire. So this idea that if you're a time traveler, you'll definitely be burned as a witch is hugely exaggerated. Yes, in some scenarios, it could happen. But if you're careful, if you don't draw attention, if you don't wave technology around, I really don't think you need to be afraid. Chapter 9. A Special Guide for Women. Okay, now we're coming to a more serious place. Going to the Middle Ages as a woman. Look, let me say this clearly. Going as a man is already hard. Going as a woman, twice as hard. Is it impossible? No, but you need more planning. You need more role-playing. First rule, the most important one, I'm underlining it. Never, but really never walk alone. A woman walking alone in the Middle Ages, that's not a normal thing. And this isn't just a matter of being socially inappropriate. This is directly a safety issue. A woman alone means an easy target. So you must have a story. I'm on a pilgrimage with my husband. I'm traveling with my brother. These are golden stories. They work everywhere. What if you really don't have a man with you? Make someone from your group the husband or the brother. Think of this like theater, but this theater keeps you alive. Now, clothing. For women, clothing is more sensitive. You must cover your head, especially if you're married. A scarf, a veil, a hood, whatever you can find. Your hair doesn't have to be completely covered, but at least half of it should be. Married women usually walk around fully covered. Young, unmarried women are a bit freer, but even they wear something on their head. No miniskirts, no tight clothes. Your body shape should not be visible. Long skirt, long sleeves, that's the standard. Colors should be plain, nothing eye-catching. Jewelry? If possible, none at all. If there is any, very tiny. If you look rich, two things happen. First, thieves show up. Second, unwanted attention shows up. Both are bad. Now, the social side. One-on-one chatting with men? Very limited. Especially long conversations with foreign men, not a good idea at all. If you need to talk to a man, either have another woman with you or be in a crowded place. Do not stay alone in a closed room with a foreign man. This will be misunderstood and it is dangerous. Women usually stick with women. You enter a town, find the other women. The market, the church, the well. Women are there. These are your social spaces. Doing business with men is a bit complicated. If you say, I'm a merchant, it might be seen as strange, but it's not impossible. Some women really did business, especially widows. If the husband died, they took over the shop. So saying, I'm a widow merchant makes more sense than saying I'm married, because a married woman walking around without her husband is very strange. Now, lodging. Do you know where the safest places are for women? Monasteries, convents for nuns. Those places are worth gold. They accept female travelers. You're safe, you're cared for by women. Staying at an inn? Choose a shared room. If you get a private room, lock the door. Keep your belongings inside. Don't go out at night. Don't go down to the inn hall, because those halls are usually like this. Drunk men, shouting, noise. Not suitable at all for a woman. Food? Ask for it in your room, or eat very early when the place is empty. Now the hard part, harassment. Unfortunately, this is real. Some men will bother you. If someone does something stupid, don't stay silent. Shout loudly, leave me alone, this is not appropriate. Reputation matters in the Middle Ages. If you publicly shame a man in front of a crowd, most of them back off. But not always. That's why group. Always group. If there is a physical attack, a dagger. Yes, women carry daggers too. They should. There's no I can't do it. Learn. This is about survival. Now, let's move to the nicer side. There are advantages to being a woman too. For example, you usually draw less suspicion. No one thinks a woman is a secret agent. In a way, you're more invisible. And female solidarity. It's very strong. Women help each other. Are you in trouble? Go to women first. Health issues? Again, women. Menstruation, pregnancy, pain. You wouldn't tell men anyway. Find an older woman. She'll give herbs. She'll give advice. And don't forget this. Going as a woman is hard, but not impossible. There were pilgrim women in history. There were traveling women. There were merchant women. They were few, but they existed. You can do it too. Just extra caution. Final note, if you're pregnant, don't go. I'm serious. There is no modern medicine. Childbirth is very risky. If you have a small child, think twice. Child mortality was very high. If they catch a disease, there is no medicine. This is a heavy decision. Okay, that's it for the Women's Guide. Be strong, be careful, and watch out for each other. Chapter 10. Daily Life Details. Now let's get into things nobody really wants to talk about, but you have to know them. Toilets, cleanliness, sleep, daily life. These sound boring, but trust me, these are the most critical parts. Let's start with the toilet. Look, in the Middle Ages, there is no toilet as you know it. No flush, no running water. Toilet paper? Forget it. In towns, most houses have a system like this. A small shed behind the house, a pit underneath. You go in, you do your business, you leave. That's it. Cleaning, straw, leaves, old pieces of cloth. Yes, I know. Terrible. In rich houses, sometimes there's something indoors called a garderobe, a hole open in the wall. Under it, it either goes directly outside or into a pit. In castles, these look like small balconies sticking out of the wall. There's a moat underneath. So, yes, everything goes into the moat. Hygiene? None. There are no public toilets inside the town either. Do you know what people do? The street, a corner, a side alley, a dark place. You pee there. For bigger business, they usually go outside the city. But sometimes they empty chamber pots out the window. Yes, street into the street. So do you know what medieval cities smell like? They smell a lot. Don't walk without watching the ground. If you step on something, it might be the worst day of your life. Now, cleanliness. Everyone says people in the Middle Ages were dirty. It's not that simple. They cared about cleanliness, just not like we do. They washed their hands. They washed their faces, especially before and after meals. But full baths? Rare. The rich, maybe once a week, once a month. The poor, a few times a year. They wash in rivers or in a basin. Is there soap? Yes, but it's expensive. A mix of animal fat and ash. The rich buy nice-smelling soap. Ordinary people use cheap, terrible-smelling soap. Most people wash with just water. Hair? Once a month, sometimes less. But they comb it. Why? Lice. Fleas. Yes, everyone has them. Prepare yourself psychologically for that. Bring modern lice medicine with you. Seriously. There's no toothbrush, but they clean their teeth. With a finger, with cloth, sometimes charcoal, sometimes salt. Tooth decay is common, but not as much as today, because sugar is rare. Bad breath? Yes, they chew mint. They chew rosemary. Body odor? No deodorant. People smell. But since everyone smells, it's normal. The rich use perfume, spices, flowers, things like that. You will smell too. Relax, no one will notice. Now, sleep. There's no electricity. The sun is everything. When the sun sets, life slows down. Candles are expensive, only the rich use them. Ordinary people go to bed 1 or 2 hours after sunset. They wake up before sunrise. Beds? The rich have feather mattresses. Ordinary people? Straw, a piece of wool blanket. Hard, uncomfortable, but there's no alternative. Staying at an inn? You will share the same bed. Yes, with strangers. This is normal, but you will find it strange. So if you have money, get a private room. Expensive, but worth it. There's also this. Sleep is divided. First sleep, then waking up at night, staying awake for an hour. Then second sleep. When they wake up at night, they pray, they chat. Sometimes they visit a neighbor. This feels normal to them. You will be surprised. Daily life, extremely routine. Wake up, pray, wash your face, get dressed. Breakfast, bread plus beer. Yes, beer in the morning. Then work. Main meal at noon. Something light in the evening. Return home when the sun sets. A bit of conversation, drink something, sleep. Next day, the same. No weekends, no vacations. Only religious holidays. Church on Sunday, work every day. Monotonous, but this is their world. Chapter 11. Food Culture in Depth. Let's come to one of my favorite topics. Food. What do we eat in the Middle Ages? How do we eat? What is available? We're getting into a very complex topic because it changes a lot depending on social class. What a noble eats and what a peasant eats are completely different things. We'll speak in general terms. Know this, bread is king. Bread is the foundation of everything. Most of the calories people consume come from bread. There is always bread. There is bread at every meal. The rich eat white bread, the poor eat black bread. The rich eat wheat bread, the poor eat barley or rye bread. Bread is incredibly important. It has enormous value. Wasting bread is considered a great sin and is looked upon very badly. Even stale bread is eaten eagerly, dipped into sauces, added to soups. Meat? This is where things get a bit complicated. The rich eat meat regularly: beef, pork, chicken, goose, birds. Hunting is a privilege. Venison is for nobles. Ordinary people, common folk, unfortunately eat very little meat. If they're lucky, once a week, maybe once a month. Meat is expensive. It is a luxury. Pork is the most common meat because pigs are cheap. Chicken is also common for both eggs and meat. Many people never eat beef in their entire lives. Fish? This is interesting. The church strictly forbids eating meat on Fridays and fasting days. There are about 150 days a year with a meat ban. On those days, people eat fish, so fish is consumed a lot, especially in coastal regions. Salted herring is extremely common, cheap and very long-lasting. It doesn't spoil. In inland regions, freshwater fish, trout, pike, carp. The rich eat fresh fish, the poor eat salted and dried fish. Vegetables? Very common, especially among the poor. Cabbage, onions, squash, peas, beans, beets, and so on. Vegetable soups and stews are made from these. Carrots exist, but not modern orange carrots, white or purple carrots. Tomatoes, peppers, and corn are also absent. These are New World products. Fruits? Extremely abundant in season. Apples, pears, plums, cherries, grapes. They are eaten fresh, dried, and turned into wine and must. Fruit is very valuable, especially in winter. Dried fruits are a source of vitamins during winter. Grains? Wheat, barley, oats, and rye. From these, bread, porridge, and beer are made. Porridge is boring but filling, the daily food of the poor. Spices? A status symbol for the rich. Black pepper, cinnamon, ginger, cloves. Very expensive, imported from distant Asia. The rich add plenty of spices to their food to show their wealth. The poor? If you're lucky, a bit of salt. Even salt is valuable and expensive. Drinks? Water is dangerous. It may be full of microbes, so people usually drink beer, wine, or ale. The alcohol content is low, not as strong as modern beer. It's more like liquid bread, a nourishing drink. Everyone drinks it: men, women, children. Even at breakfast, beer is drunk. This is normal. Wine is more expensive, especially good wine. Cheap wine can be sour and harsh, but still better than drinking water. Milk? Not consumed much. It is usually turned into cheese and butter. Fresh milk spoils quickly, so processed dairy products are more common. Cheese is very important, especially because it lasts a long time. Now let's come to table manners. No forks. Yes, you heard that right. Forks are not widespread. They are only used a bit in Italy. People eat with their fingers and use knives and spoons. Bread is used as a plate. It's called a trencher. A thick slice of bread is cut and food is placed on it. You eat the food, then you eat the sauce-soaked bread. Or you give the bread to the poor. This is a sign of charity. Hands are washed at the table, before and after eating. A basin and towel are passed around. Everyone washes their hands. This is very important, part of proper manners. Eating from a common bowl is widespread. Everyone takes from the same bowl and shares. You don't have your own plates, you share. That's why clean hands are extremely important. Talking with your mouth full, making noise while chewing, these are rude behaviors. Before taking food yourself, offer it to the person next to you. Sharing is important. Do not drink wine before someone above you has drunk. Drinking follows social hierarchy. Feasts? They are grand events for the rich. Many courses of food, music, entertainment. Exotic animals like peacock and swan are served. They may not even be eaten, but they are impressive. Shaped dishes, decorations, sculptural presentations, all for showing wealth and power. Fasting periods? The church sets many fasting days. On these days, no meat, no dairy, only fish, vegetables, and bread. During Lent, the 40 days before Easter, fasting is very strict. Some people live only on bread and water. Fasting is a religious duty. Everyone is expected to observe it. Periods of hunger? In years of bad harvests, famine occurs. People go hungry. Some even die of starvation. In famine, people eat wild plants, roots of grasses. I really didn't want to say this, but they even eat cats, dogs, rats. In very bad times, cannibalism can happen, but very rarely. Food is not just nutrition, it is a social event. Eating together strengthens bonds and creates community. Hospitality is extremely important. Hosting a guest with food is an honor, a duty. Refusing food insults the host, so whatever is offered, accept it politely and eat at least a little. Chapter 12. Entertainment and Leisure. Medieval people were not focused only on working and surviving. They also knew how to have fun. Life was hard, yes, but people always found a way to enjoy themselves. Their idea of entertainment was very different from ours, but it was still an important part of daily life. The biggest forms of entertainment were festivals. Religious holidays such as Christmas, Easter, and Saints' Days were times everyone eagerly awaited. First, people went to church, then the town squares came alive. Food was prepared, drinks were consumed, people danced, music was played, and games were played. Rich or poor, everyone took part in these celebrations. There were traveling performers in the streets. Musicians, acrobats, jugglers, magicians, and puppet masters traveled from town to town. People gathered, watched the performances, applauded, and those who could afford it left a few coins. These traveling entertainers were like the television of the Middle Ages. Music was everywhere in life. String instruments like the lute and oud, and wind instruments like flutes and bagpipes were commonly used. Music was present both at grand feasts and at small village celebrations. Percussion instruments, such as drums and tambourines, were also frequently used. Folk songs, dance music, and religious hymns were part of everyday life. People sang together, danced, and had fun. Dancing was very common in the Middle Ages. There were group dances performed in circles, as well as dances where couples faced each other. Peasants and townspeople performed simpler folk dances, while nobles preferred more elegant and complex figures. Wherever there was music, dancing would begin, and most of the time, no one stayed on the sidelines. Especially during festivals held in spring and summer, dancing was essential. May 1st or May Day celebrations had a special kind of excitement. People danced around the maypole, decorated themselves with flowers, and celebrated all day long. Games were also quite varied. Dice games were common, card games appeared after the 14th century, board games similar to backgammon were played. Gambling was officially forbidden, but almost everyone did it to some extent, usually with small amounts of money. Children played ball games in the streets, as well as games like hide-and-seek or blind man's buff. Sometimes even adults joined in. Tournaments belonged mostly to the nobility. Knights charged at each other on horseback with lances, putting on a great spectacle for spectators. Ordinary people could not compete, but even watching was entertainment in itself. These events were usually held together with feasts. Hunting was also a privilege of the nobility. Still, common people sometimes hunted rabbits or birds on a small scale. This both contributed to the table and provided a way to pass the time. Storytelling was another form of entertainment loved by everyone. In the evenings, people gathered to listen to heroic tales, romantic stories, or humorous anecdotes. Traveling storytellers visited towns and gave small performances. Listeners were often completely captivated and listened for hours. Theater? Yes, but limited. Religious plays were organized by the church. Stories from the Bible were staged for everyone to watch. Sometimes comedic scenes were added to entertain the audience. Fairs? These were magnificent. Large towns held fairs once or twice a year. Merchants came from everywhere, selling exotic goods. But fairs were not just about trade. They were centers of entertainment. Shows, competitions, food stalls, people spent days there. Animal fights? Unfortunately, yes. Cockfighting, bear baiting, dog fights. From a modern perspective, very cruel, but at the time, a common form of entertainment. People placed bets, watched, and cheered. Bathhouses?
Interestingly, some towns had public bathhouses. People washed there, but also socialized. Food and drink were served. Some of these places turned into questionable establishments, if you know what I mean. The church did not approve of them very much. Taverns and inns, these were social centers for men. Beer was drunk, people talked, games were played, gossip spread, news was shared. Women usually did not go to taverns, though some did. If a woman went to a tavern, she could be seen as having a bad reputation. Participation in religious ceremonies, this was also a social event. Going to church was not just about prayer, it was about meeting people. Services were long, sometimes lasting for hours, but this was also time to see neighbors and chat. Free time? There wasn't actually much of it. People worked a lot, rest was limited. But evenings, especially in winter, were long. Families gathered, talked, and told stories. If you were lucky, a neighbor played the lute and people sang. Simple, but warm. Strong sense of community.
Chapter 13. The Legal System. Now, let's come to a very important but somewhat dry topic, the legal system. If you get into trouble, you need to know what will happen. The medieval legal system is completely different from the modern one. First of all, written laws are limited. Most law is customary law, meaning tradition. The logic is, we've always done it this way, so this is the rule. Each region, each lord may have their own rules. So when you travel from one place to another, the rules can change. Courts? There are several types. The Lord's Court, manorial court. In rural areas, the lord holds court on his own land. Serfs and peasants go to this court. Small disputes, land issues, minor crimes. Town court. In towns, there is a municipal court for merchants and craftsmen. Commercial disputes, guild rules, bargaining conflicts. Church court for religious matters. Marriage, divorce, wills, moral offenses. The church had very broad jurisdiction. Royal court, the highest level. Serious crimes, disputes between nobles, but ordinary people have very limited access to this court. So how does the court process work? Let's assume someone accuses you. Maybe they claim you stole something or broke an agreement. First, an informal solution is sought. Mediation is used. An elder, a priest, or a guild member may act as a mediator. If this fails, the case goes to court. The court is usually public. Anyone can watch. The accuser explains their claim. You present your defense. Witnesses are called and give testimony. But the evidence system is very weak by modern standards. Physical evidence is rarely used. Witness testimony and oaths matter much more. The compurgation system. If enough people swear on your behalf, you are considered innocent. So your reputation and social network are extremely important. If 12 people swear, "This man does not lie," you are released. But if no one swears for you, that looks very bad. Ordeal? Judgment of God? Yes, it is still used in some places. Fire ordeal. You hold a hot iron. If the wound heals, you are innocent. Water ordeal. You are thrown into water. If you sink, you are innocent, but you may drown. If you float, you are guilty. Shocking, but the logic is the belief that God protects the innocent. After the 13th century, the church began to ban this, but it continued in some places. Duels are used among nobles. Two people fight in single combat, the winner is right. Again, there is always the belief that God is on the side of the just. But this is not really applied to ordinary people because they are ordinary. Punishments? We've already talked about these. Imprisonment is rare, physical punishments are more common. Fines are widespread, especially for minor crimes, our favorite. Stealing goods, a fine or a whipping, etc. Repeat offenses, cutting off an ear or a hand. Serious crimes, murder, treason, hanging, or burning. Public punishments are common, everyone watches. This serves as both deterrence and as a display of social justice. Dispute resolution? Out-of-court solutions are common. Families or guilds settle matters among themselves. Compensation is paid, apologies are made, agreements are made. Blood feuds? Yes, especially common in Scotland and Italy. If one family kills someone, the other family seeks revenge. This can last for generations. The church and lords try to stop this but are not always successful. Contracts? Yes, they exist, but most are verbal. A handshake is an agreement. Making a promise in front of witnesses is binding. Written contracts are used for important matters, land sales, large trade deals, but since most people are illiterate, seals are used. You press your seal into wax. This is like your signature. What matters for you as a foreigner? Avoid going to court if you can. If you have a dispute, resolve it through mediation. Apologize, pay compensation, compromise. Because court is long, expensive, and unpredictable. And as a foreigner, you don't have a local support network. Finding witnesses will be difficult. People may not trust you. The best option is not to get into trouble at all. Follow the rules, harm no one, keep your agreements. And if you really must go to court, find a local sponsor, someone who can speak for you. Maybe the innkeeper where you're staying, maybe a merchant you've met. The support of such people is extremely important. Chapter 14. Arrival Scenarios and the First 24 Hours. Right now, theoretically, you know everything. But how will this work in practice? Let's go step by step. You are in your time machine, traveling to medieval Europe. When and where should you arrive? Let's first look at the question of when. What hour? What day? Absolutely arrive at night, not in daylight. Ideally, sometime around 2 to 3 a.m., after midnight. At that hour, everyone is asleep and the streets are empty. But do not arrive inside the city. Arrive outside it in a forest. The edge of the forest is ideal, but do not go too deep inside. Remember, forests are dangerous. Wild animals and bandits are definitely possible. Which season? Spring or early summer is best. The weather is mild, food is plentiful, roads are open. Winter is very hard. Cold, hunger, disease. Autumn is also good, but you must be fully prepared for winter. You have arrived, now what will you do? The first 10 minutes, stay calm and carefully observe your surroundings. Did anyone see your arrival? Listen, are there any sounds? If everything is quiet, you're fine, you're on the right track. Hide your time machine immediately or send it back, whatever the case may be. Check your clothing. Is everything in place? Your money, your dagger, your belongings, are they all there? The first hour, stay in the forest and wait for morning. Sit under a tree and rest. But do not sleep. Stay alert. When the sun begins to rise, it's time to move. Go to the edge of the forest and find a road. Somewhere close to the main road, but not too noticeable. Morning. When people start traveling, you start too. Find a group of travelers and approach them. Say, "Good morning. I'm also going to there. May I travel with you?" People usually accept. Traveling in a group is safer. As you approach the town, prepare your backstory. Think of a name for yourself. Names of the period: John, William, Robert, Mary, Alice, Joan. Where are you from? Where are you going? Why? They will ask you these questions. Be prepared. At the gate. In some towns, there are guards at the entrance. They may stop you and ask who you are. Be calm, friendly, and open. Say, "I am a pilgrim going to there. I will stay a few days." They usually let you in. There is no problem. Your first hour in town. Look around and get your bearings. Find the church. It is a central point. Find the market square. This is the social center. Look for an inn or a place to stay. Find a local person and politely ask, "Excuse me, could you recommend a good inn?" People are usually willing to help. After arranging accommodation, leave your belongings, but keep valuables on you. Then start exploring the town. Go to the market and look around. Buy a few things: bread, cheese, a drink. This helps you adapt to town life. Talk to people, but don't ask too many questions. Listen more, observe. First evening. Eat your early meal before places get crowded. Then maybe go to the tavern, if you are male, and socialize a bit. Order a beer and join the conversation. But don't drink too much, stay alert. First night, go to bed early, shortly after sunset. Lock your door and keep your valuables secure. Before sleeping, think about your plan. What will you do tomorrow? The first 24 hours are very important. These first impressions will shape your reputation in the town. Be polite, respectful, and open. Listen to people, learn and adapt. And remember, be patient. This will take time. The first day will feel strange and uncomfortable, but after a few days, you will get used to it. And who knows, maybe you will even like it. Chapter 15. Final Thoughts and Staying Safe. Anyway, let's put a full stop here now. The video has already gotten quite long. Before you go, for those who are curious, I'll leave a few reading recommendations. You'll see them on the screen, and they'll also be in the description. Let's already wish you a good journey. May luck be with you. But before I close, there's one more thing I want to say. Going to medieval Europe sounds exciting, I admit it. There's adventure, there's uncertainty, but to be honest, it will be hard. Physically hard, mentally exhausting, and emotionally draining. Many of the things we're used to in modern life simply don't exist. There's no turning on a tap and getting water, no light switch. Going to a doctor is not a 2-minute task. Everything moves more slowly, dirtier, riskier. But there's another side to it as well. People are closer to each other. There's neighborliness, conversation, solidarity. Life may be simpler, but strangely more real. No phones, no notifications, no screens. Just people, nature, and everyday life. If you were really going to take such a journey, my only advice would be this. Be open-minded. Don't judge immediately. Those people live in a different world. Their values are different. Their rules are different. But that doesn't make them stupid or worthless. In fact, in some ways, they were better than us. A sense of community, for example. Belonging. Looking out for one another. We have lost much of that today. So yes, there are lessons to be taken from the Middle Ages. And one small but important note, if you are a woman, extra caution. That period was harder for women. More restrictions, less freedom, more risk. Still, it's not impossible. You just need to plan more. Have trustworthy people with you. Say that you are married. Don't dress in a way that draws attention. And stay alert. Always. All right, friends, I really am finishing now. I hope this guide has been useful to you. If one day you go to medieval Europe, don't forget to come back and tell us about it. Joking aside, even this imaginary journey has shown us one thing. Even though people seem to have changed a lot, at their core, they haven't changed much. After all, we are all human. Take care of yourselves. May your luck be plenty. May your path be clear.